itself as an enclosure. But I'm sure that you view this as part of a much greater strategic outlook. Could you discuss it and the build-up and the general consequences of this escalation in strategic terms?
I certainly do feel that this is the real American tragedy, not just the participation over there, but the fact that it is monopolizing our attention both at the policy-making level and at the public level, to the point where we exclude practically everything else, some of which have far greater importance. I would refer to our rather indifferent attitude toward NATO at the present time, and toward the way that we are fumbling in our policy toward Africa as a whole, which I regard as a real danger point. But it's because people can't think or talk about anything in this country except Vietnam.
How would you weigh, sir, the priorities in terms of overriding national interests? Or would you even agree that priorities can be taken between our stake in the Atlantic family and our stake in Southeast Asia?
I regard the former as the imperative, the most important thing before us.
The Atlantic family?
Yes, sir. I feel that this is more important even than UN.
And do you gentlemen, either both of you, believe that it is being seriously weakened by the great drain of the Southeast Asian struggle?
Well, as a political science professor, I've learned that there is a certain tendency in the United States of what is called following a one-burner policy. You watch the one burner at once. In other words, Vietnam is the burner that's really hot where the milk is really sizzling. In the meantime, you don't really know what happens in all the other little boiling pots. Now, as you recently saw perhaps James Reston saying that in a way Charles de Gaulle has done the United States a service by reminding everybody that Europe still exists. It may be one heck of a way of doing it, mind you, but there it is. So perhaps there is a point that in the last 2 years, Vietnam has been overemphasized. After all, it is a Missouri-sized country with 15 million people. And each side, both the Soviet bloc and the United States, have taken losses in the past. The Soviets, after all, did lose in Yugoslavia, they lost in Greece, they lost in Azerbaijan. These were direct Russian losses. I'm not speaking of Chinese losses. Then on top of that, communist losses in Malaya and the Philippines, and Russian withdrawal of missiles from Cuba, without really impinging on the credibility of the Soviet Union as a major power. And the same thing is...
Bernard, we're not very heavily reminded, because if we were so, people in this country would get more exercised about the Secretary of Defense a few weeks ago making the statement that no, this had not weakened our NATO commitment in any way and would not do so, and within a few days of that time he's announcing that 15,000 troops are being pulled out.
And now it's 30.
And now it's 30. And yet nobody is getting excited about this. I don't read the editorials in our paper saying, look, Mr. Secretary, you come to terms with this problem, with your overall problem, instead of concentrating on this one thing. And if the policies, the manpower policies that you have arbitrarily decided on and are maintaining are proved no good by what you're doing, then you again come square with the policy and change your mind for once. No one says that to him.
Are you suggesting, as I gather from what you're saying now, that we're spread thin?
Yes, sir. I think we're spread excessively thin, despite his disclaimer.
I wonder, in these terms, if we could talk now still in this general area of strategic development about China itself. In your new forthcoming book, Dr. Full, which I'm now reading in galley form, and it's really very good, Vietnam Mission.
Vietnam Witness.
Vietnam Witness. You made a remark that I found very interesting. I think you said that Vietnam was the crossroads to nowhere, in which you were talking about strategic interests. You spoke about Laos, Vietnam.
That's right.
And I believe you said that the real shield to Southeast Asia would be Thailand rather than Vietnam itself, which lies across furthest frontiers. Would you then not support the idea of the domino theory or the great strategic importance of this area?
No, sir. The domino theory is far overplayed. I'll remind you, of course, of the very much current example, always Czechoslovakia. Yes, when the British and French failed to defend Czechoslovakia, World War II broke out. To which the answer is, in 1948, exactly 10 years later after Munich, the United States failed to defend Czechoslovakia, and the result was totally opposite. The Europeans banded together, built NATO, and flew the Berlin airlift. The United States flew it, and the Europeans aided it. In other words, exactly the same situation. The loss of a given country had a totally opposite result. In other words, you cannot take a military situation out of its overall political context. Then, if the United States makes it a howling success in Thailand, if Thailand becomes a perfect success of both nation building and counterinsurgency, as the word is called, this will add much more to the United States in terms of credibility in the area than fight a stalemated war in which it is being demonstrated that a major American force is being stalemated by 200,000 armed peasants.
Gentlemen,
I say this is so as far as it goes, but there are certain exceptions I must take. In the first place, Thailand is not strategically the key ground. It may be the key community, but the key ground is southern Laos, where the Mekong transcribes the border between Thailand and Laos. This is the linchpin of that peninsula.
We hold in the Mekong Valley even today.
Yes, I know we are, but we're doing it in a very limited way. Now, I'll go on and make another point. That if we are going to concentrate on Thailand, and then Thailand is directly threatened and there's an aggression against Thailand, and we have to move in there. These ports on the east coast of Vietnam would be of utmost importance to us. And that's where I feel Jim Gavin was seriously wrong in his statement before the Senate committee, that this had no significance with respect to the defense of Thailand. It has tremendous significance.
What's the importance of the Nang Slam in terms of defense of...
I'm talking about the building up of port facilities there, so that we would have a close-by stepping stone.
Well, we have the close, I'm sure we won't go into a great strategic discussion of this, but actually the Bangkok Air Base, for example, the Dong Muang, or the new American air bases in northeast Thailand are perfectly accessible to American air bases offshore. Whereas Da Nang has absolutely no hinterland. The Marines at Da Nang are exactly within 2 miles of where they were when they landed a year ago. I was in Cam Ranh last summer. Cam Ranh is magnificent, except it's got absolutely no hinterland to it except wild jungle and VCs. And so what you do is you dump the stuff on the beaches and you put it back either on airplanes or on other smaller ships and distribute it. But the strategic importance of Da Nang versus Subic Bay, for example, in the Philippines, is nil.
in terms of what we're talking about, didn't you feel this was a rather serious lack in the picture we saw, which was a very close-up picture and gave no real feeling of some of these broader implications that we're talking about?
Well, that's the difference between American reporting. In fact, this is what Jack Gold pointed out in the New York Times of that film. The film actually is the human impact of the war. It's concentrated on on both the American who is in this war and on the Vietnamese who's the butt of it, if you want to put it this way. In a way, very fortunately for once, we didn't get a close-up shot of American generals, of Vietnamese generals. We've seen a few Vietnamese generals, too many lately. Or too many of Vietnamese generals, let me put it this way. It didn't show you politically important Buddhist priests. It shows you a whole bunch of bewildered people. Let's face it, both bewildered Americans on the ground and bewildered Vietnamese.
But you kept insisting in the picture itself and in all of your writings for the last 10 years, you keep stressing the fact that 85% of the population is peasant or lives in rural communities, that the war will stand or fall to either side depending upon the support or acceptance by the peasants of one side or the other. Would you agree, General Marshall, that this is as great or perhaps even a greater factor than the military factor in the struggle for Vietnam?
I think they're concomitant. I don't see how they can be otherwise. Because fundamentally what these people need more than all else is security, isn't it? A chance to feel fairly safe at night, a chance to improve their living, the possibility of going out in the fields day after day without being raided, etc. This is what they need. And to the extent that more and more of the countryside is being brought into this pattern, then we would move towards success. By the same token, it seems to me that one of the most fantastic notions of all is that it would be possible in this country, under these conditions, to hold a national election.
So that's interesting, but before we get to that, save that, because that's a full period of discussion. I want to plumb the meaning of what you're saying. You said concomitant, and I suppose you mean that both march together, the military and the political.
Exactly.
Yet in your description, General Marshall, that you just gave us now, you gave me the feeling that you were putting more stress in the first phase of providing security to the people by the military before political, economic, and social reforms can be carried out.
Definitely so. To the extent that it's possible under wartime conditions, the program should go forward together. But on the other hand, I cannot envisage moving toward political stabilization until there is some promise of military success.
Well, this is where we come in. Actually, we don't disagree, but we disagree on the priorities, apparently. It is my feeling, I'm sure if John Marshall thinks about it, he probably will agree, is that the only way to secure the villages effectively is to know who is part of the communist structure in the villages. If the villager does not tell you who is member of what is called the parallel hierarchy in the village, who's part of the communist structure, you won't find out. And as long as you don't know who the terrorists are, who are cutting people's throats, you are going to lose villagers even with barbed wire and troops in them. If you find the village chief dead in his bed in the morning, even if there are 2,000 American troops in the perimeter, you've lost the village. Therefore, we come back to the sort of chicken and egg proposition. In order to win over the villagers, they must be given a stake on your side. A stake consists, as we said in the film, human dignity. The guy's got to realize that you are going to deliver the goods to him, not the goods in the physical sense. You're going to treat him right, he's going to have a voice in what's going on, he's going to get a piece of land that belongs to him and not to the landlord. Once you deliver on this, he will be with you and will tell you, this is the communist over there. He is the man who oppresses us. Now, the reverse proposition on the army side is, yes, it's all very fine, but how can you give him a piece of land if you first haven't swept and cleared it with military means? So this is literally where the symbiosis comes in, or what General Marshall called the concomitant operation. Now, with regard to what's happening in Vietnam, the hard and brutal fact is, according to the most recent statements by the Department of Defense, is we have not succeeded in extending the secured areas. They have been working on a plan called HOP-TAC, the cooperation plan from the Saigon area, clearing an area of 20 miles around Saigon. Well, gentlemen, they just shot up Saigon Airport the other day. I mean, they obviously haven't cleared even 10 miles, not even cleared 5 miles from downtown Saigon, enough not to get shelled up with mortars.
There isn't any way that you can be certain of clearing all of Saigon any more than you could clear the area of any American city of all its criminal element, let us say.
Oh, but
you've got to find them first. You've got to identify them. This mortar attack did not surprise me at all. This thing is thoroughly possible under these conditions. Dr. Fall and I have often discussed this question, and we continue to disagree on it, but our disagreements are marginal. It isn't a question of which comes first, the chicken or the egg. That you do as much as you can do under the conditions. But I would go on to say that you cannot expect stability of political satisfaction or agreement, not only in the Vietnamese, but in any other people until the simple things that they need to live by are relatively assured of it. And in our information service, for instance, 18 months ago, we took a secret polling of villages over there. The villages that had not been hit at any time and had been safe all along, where the people were getting in their crops, they were 100% for the government. And the villages that had been hit a couple of times, they're about 70% for government. The villages that were being hit every other month, they were about 40%.
Hit by what? By the VC or
by the VC. And then you get down